Welcome to Tourism Talk. I'm Laura Oswald, Director of Marketing at the Paducah Convention and Visitors Bureau. When Paducah joined the UNESCO Creative Cities Network in 2013, we joined 2 U.S. creative cities already within the network: Santa Fe, a city of crafts and folk art, and Iowa City, a city of literature. Today, we have a representative of Iowa City here with us. We've learned so much from him so far in our time in the network, and we look forward to him sharing a bit more about his city with you today. Thank you for joining us today, John.
Thank you.
So glad to have you back in Paducah.
Glad to be here.
This is your second visit. You were here for the Creative Cities meeting that Paducah hosted in 2017.
I was.
And here you are. You're back to speak to our Rotary Club, and you've been touring the city and getting to know Paducah a little bit better. And as we talked about this morning, there's a big opportunity for collaboration to come out of this discovery of our places and of the goals of our cities. Tell us a little bit about your experience in Paducah so far and how you're seeing it with Iowa City in mind.
Sure. Well, you know, it's interesting because we are part of this 180 city network, and a lot of the cities we just know on paper, what we see online, and it's been really valuable for me to be able to be here twice now and really get a much better sense of the community, what goes on here, the art scene. You know, Paducah, I think, is known internationally as the home of the International Quilt Museum, for example, but there's so much more going on here. And so to be able to see some of the arts community and the revitalization that's gone on has been really good for us to better understand Paducah and what happens here. And so as we look at ways that we as U.S. cities can collaborate, it just puts in mind some of the opportunities that might be there, and we can think a little bit more specifically about what those should be.
Yes, love it. Very well said. Well, as you talk about Paducah being known for quilting, Iowa City is known for literature around the world. Tell us a little bit about what that literary heritage is in Iowa City and how you all found a place in the Creative Cities Network through that.
Sure. Well, Iowa City is best known for the Iowa Writers Workshop at the University of Iowa, which is more than 80 years old. It was the first graduate writing program in the country and is usually listed as the best when those types of rankings come out. And that was really something that was the culmination of decades of writing and pursuit of literature in Iowa City. You know, Iowa City was not necessarily unique early on for the literature, but there were decisions made at the university to grant advanced degrees for creative work. The university was the first university to do so back in 1922. And so that meant that students who wanted to learn about writing and not just to study writing as a way of analyzing it or to be able to teach it, came to Iowa City to pursue that. And then the people who wanted to teach them came to Iowa City to teach them. And so it was this constantly regenerating community of writers, both young writers and established writers who came here, and that has perpetuated itself today, and we have more than a dozen programs that are among the best in the world at what they do, that have all kind of grown out of that early movement. And so, you know, Iowa City is a literary hub. It has decades and decades of history, and we've been able to continue to grow on that as we've moved through the years.
Yes, well, we have had Chris Merrill here on the show, and he is with the International Creative Writing Program here, and he shared great stories about the value of literature and connecting cultures, and bridging the world together. I'm sure you have some very interesting stories of people that have come in from the outside to partake in that culture. Yeah,
well, you know, the program that you mentioned, Chris's program at Iowa called the International Writing Program, has brought more than 1,400 people from around the world over more than 50 years. And so there have been many examples over the years of like an Israeli writer and a Palestinian writer coming together in Iowa City for that 10-week residency and being natural adversaries when they walk in the room and leaving as best friends and writing about that in their careers as they move on. And so Obviously they're not bringing about world peace on their own, but though there are smaller pieces of that that they are able to do. So we've had, Indian and Pakistani writers. We've had, whatever conflict there might be in the world, there are usually writers from those countries who come together in Iowa City, look past their differences, and can use literature to bridge those gaps. We really think of literature as a way to build empathy, as a way to help people inhabit the lives of others that they couldn't possibly experience any other way. And that's a very powerful way for us, with the world the way it is today, to allow people to maybe come together to better understand one another and to see that maybe we aren't as different as they thought.
Yes. And obviously your office is kind of at the heart of that mission, and that I'm sure is in your minds all the time. Each of the creative cities is set up in a bit of a different way and how it's managed within the city. In Iowa City, you are affiliated with the university. Tell us a little bit about the Iowa City of Literature office and how you're set up and what your role is.
Sure. So we do have some affiliation with the university. We're actually an independent nonprofit. It was decided at the outset when we got the designation 10 years ago that we would be better served by having an independent body represent or manage the designation, because the university is such a strong driver of everything that's literary in Iowa City. If this was simply something that was in the city offices or at the CVB, it might be more difficult for us to meaningfully collaborate or partner with the university entities or those outside of it. And so it was decided that we would form this independent nonprofit. And so we receive some financial support from many different entities, the university and the city among them. My board is huge. I have a big representation from those entities, as well as people from the literary community, the business community, and community volunteers. But it allows us to be a lot more nimble, I think, than we would otherwise be. And so we can take on collaborative projects with university entities or city entities or private entities in a way that we might not have been able to do. And as you mentioned, most of the cities around the world are managed differently depending on what works best in that city. We've found that that works really well for us and allows us to do things that we might not otherwise be able to do.
Yes, definitely. And you have done some great things with that over the past 10 years. You said you're just now in your 11th year as a creative city of literature. Your office promotes collaboration with the network, which we were just talking about is such a value. This isn't just a mark saying you're a creative city, but that network adds so much value. So tell us about your engagement with the cities of literature. You've hosted the cluster meeting in Iowa City, but you all have a very tight-knit group and seem to have great collaboration that benefits you all.
Yeah, well, it's one of those things that with the designation, it's maybe the most difficult thing for us to communicate locally, is that it's not just an honorific, and it's not just then the creation of a local programming organization, though both of those things are true, but it's the fact that we are a member of this 180 city network and a member of the 28 city of literature network. And so we have done a lot of projects, large and small, with our City of Literature network. Sometimes it's as simple as putting together a summer reading list where we all share a book by an author from our community, and then we put that out in the world through social media just to give people a flavor of the variety and the depth of the work that's being done in our cities. Sometimes it's more in depth where a lot of the cities have writers' residencies, and they're specifically earmarked for writers from other cities of literature. And so a writer from I'm trying to think of which city had gone first. We had city writers like from Reykjavik go to Prague, and we've had writers from Barcelona go to Melbourne, or all of these types of things that happen. And that's a good way, again, for us to share those stories. We're literally taking the mind of someone from one city and planting them in the community of another, and trying to figure out how you perceive that community through these different eyes, or this different set of experiences. We have done a lot of exchanges through our festivals. At our book festival, we have brought in writers from Dublin and from Melbourne and from Reykjavik and other cities as well. And it's a good opportunity, again, to not just have a book listed on a sheet and say you should read this, but we actually bring the author over and introduce them to a new audience and introduce our audience to a new writer. So we found a lot of different ways to, again, I quote my colleague David from Melbourne. He says that our job is to make the world smaller. And I really like that, because that really gets at the heart of a lot of the things that we try to do.
Absolutely. Well, I think it's a great time for you to share where people can find more information online. I know those summer reading lists are often posted, and you have a great social media, so share with our viewers where they can find that.
Yeah, well, our website is iowacity.literature.org, all one word. And then we also have Facebook presence and Twitter presence and Instagram presence, all under those. I believe those are all Iowa City of Lit. We had to abbreviate those. And all of those are listed off of that main web page as well. And then all of the other cities of literature have their own websites. Most of them have their own social media presence. And you can find links to all of those through our website as well.
Great, great. And jumping back to that summer reading list, I know Paducah Life magazine here in Paducah, wanting to promote that connection with the Creative Cities Network, has promoted those reading lists in the past and published them in their online archive, so you can also find them there. But I think that that's a good time for us to share about what you did last night, meeting with some of the local book clubs and sharing about the City of Literature work. What was that engagement like, meeting some of our reading community?
Yeah, well, it was wonderful. I mean, I was making a mental list of all of the books they were talking about having read, and it was great. There were representatives from 5 different book clubs there. And it was interesting, because some of the women who were there said, oh, well, I'm representing this book club, but there are 2 others that I'm a member of that we're not representing here. So, you know, obviously there are many, many book clubs in Paducah, which is great to see. And it was a great opportunity to, again, share our story and talk a little bit more in depth about some of the things we do. Answer some questions, and my overarching goal was to put a burning desire to come to Iowa City into the hearts of all of them, and hopefully we did that with some at least.
Yes, well, this is Tourism Talk, so maybe give us a pitch on Iowa City. Obviously, every creative city has much more than that creative field that they're designated in. Beyond literature and the great literature experiences that you have, what can people expect in Iowa City?
Well, we are definitely a university town. University of Iowa is at the heart of our city. And, you know, it has such a vibrant arts community. Again, even if you stripped away the literature, which we would never do, of course, but if you took all of that out, you would have you know, wonderful performing arts centers. They have a wonderful school of music that is doing free concerts constantly. We have wonderful visual arts. We are actually, we had flooding that I know folks at Paducah know all too much about 10 years ago, and we're still coming back from that. We have a beautiful new performing arts center to replace one that had been damaged in the flood, our Hanshaw Auditorium, which is a $170 or $80 million facility that's just gorgeous. That has concerts and Broadway productions and theatrical productions throughout the year. We are still working on bringing back our Museum of Art, but there are places on campus that have kind of filled the gap there. But the collection that they have is just staggering and definitely worth a visit. And the independent arts community is wonderful as well. I mean, we have a lot of clubs with live music most nights. A couple of small independent theaters that are always doing great and challenging work. It's just a really vibrant arts community above and beyond the literature that's there, kind of permeating the fabric of what we do.
We often say, you know, creativity, culture, innovation are really at the heart of this network. And the cities certainly value those things, and it's not just apparent within the arts, it's apparent within the whole community. Are there examples that you can think of how creativity, culture, and innovation have been a means to sustaining your city moving forward? And I think that flood provides a perfect jumping off point of how you've re-envisioned some things in that way.
It is interesting. The flood, as devastating as it was a real catalyst. I mean, people very early chose you know, you can go one of 2 ways with a flood. You can just try to build everything back to the way it was and get on with your life, or you can use that as an opportunity. And we very much used it as an opportunity. So we have, you know, a bigger and better performing arts center. We will eventually have a bigger and better art museum. But beyond that, what it did is it forced people out of their comfort zones and out of their usual spaces and their usual ways of doing things. Now, 10 years later, there is a tremendous amount of collaboration that wasn't necessarily there before. A lot of innovation. There are organizations that are working together. There are spaces that are being programmed in much different ways, and just different initiatives that have taken place because people chose to see that as an opportunity and say, let's just not build back to where we were, let's make it better.
Yes.
And so that's been great. And there definitely are spaces in Iowa City that have been adapted. There's a space downtown called Merge. It's actually in the library's building. And it's an open space. It was a coffee shop at one time, and they have now put economic development group in there. There is bench space for people to just do co-working work. You know, they have the 3D printer in there for people to come in and use it as a maker space. We hold book festival events in there. It's become a real hub for the community. And again, it's taking something and re-envisioning what it could be and finding different adaptive ways to make it work. So it's been really great for the community.
I think that, you know, being able to share those best practices with us here in Paducah, a city that is affected by flooding, you know, think about those opportunities and the challenges and how we can creatively emerge better and look towards the future. So we appreciate you sharing, and I know that is at the heart of the network, being able to share and learn. Are there particular cities that have been especially inspiring to Iowa City that you've really connected with or learned valuable lessons from?
I would definitely say, you know, Edinburgh has been a real inspiration for all of us. You know, it was the first city in our overall network. It had the designation by itself as a city of literature for 4 years before Melbourne and Iowa City joined in 2008. And so in some ways, they really set the standard for what a city of literature or a member of the Creative Cities Network can be, and have been really at the forefront of figuring out ways to do programming, to do fundraising, in terms of outreach. But you know, many of the cities have different areas of expertise or different things that they do very well, and so we have learned from them a lot. I've had the great pleasure of traveling to a number of the different cities and seeing what they do on the ground, meeting their people, and really taking away you know, ideas for what to do. I was in Melbourne, Australia at the end of 2018 and had the opportunity to connect there. And what they do is very different from what we do. They are part of a state government supported writing center. They don't do their own programming. They help to facilitate things out in the community. And so seeing what they do and the differences between what they do and what we do have been very instrumental. And so that's just one example of ways that we've been able to learn from our peers.
Sure. And your network, or your cluster of the cities of literature is so, like I said, tight-knit, and we feel like we're so inspired by seeing what your group is doing. But we're also inspired to connect with the U.S. creative cities, and we're really glad that that network has grown from 3 initially, Paducah, Santa Fe, Iowa City, now to 9. And so that brings some new diversity into the network. And I know we've talked a little bit while you're here about strengthening that network and how, you know, in our own communities, when we talk about creative cities, you want to know about who's in your cluster, and then also those other U.S. cities. What do you see the future of our U.S. cities working together? What can we do in collaboration?
Well, I think that there are definitely opportunities for collaborative projects, and I don't know specifically how those would manifest themselves, but I do think that there are ways to raise awareness in all of our cities about what's going on in the other cities, to find ways to get our artists together in creative ways, to have them collaborate. One of the great things about the Creative Cities Network is that UNESCO really promotes those cross-disciplinary connections and collaborations, and so finding ways to incorporate music with literature or the visual arts with gastronomy or whatever it might be, I think will only elevate all of us. And you know, a lot of the cities that are in the U.S. now are fairly new to the network, and it's been exciting to see them get their legs under them and figure out what it means to be a creative city. And I would say in the next 3 to 5 years, certainly, people will be able to see some real interesting ways for us to leverage that, and we'll surely bring on new cities in the coming years and only expand that network.
Yes, and I know obviously our cities are some of the smaller cities, so for us it has been so valuable to be able to say, look, Detroit, everyone is hearing about what Detroit is doing, what Austin is doing, and gives kind of a new maybe definition to what creative cities are. How, in your community, how do you explain that idea of a creative city?
Well, sometimes it can be difficult because there's so many layers to what it means. But really, I talk about it as a celebration of cities that have an exemplary culture in one particular discipline, but they're creative beyond that, and that they have strong international connections. I think that's a real important part that's sometimes lost in this, is that you know, we talk about this. There are literary cities and there are cities of literature. And there are many literary cities around the world and throughout the country, but having that real strong international footprint and being able to connect with other cities around the world and then have that inform what you're doing with your other cities in your country is very important. And so it's, you know, as we were talking, it's not an honorific, it's membership in a network, and it's ongoing. And so what it means to be a city of literature or a city of crafts and folk art is different today than it was 5 years ago, and different than it will be 5 years from now. And that's the exciting part of that, is that it's continually evolving in terms of what that means.
Yes, yes. Well, what is next for Iowa City of Literature in your office?
Well, our big things, you know, I often talk about it's kind of a three-legged stool in terms of what we do. We do advocacy about the things that are going on in Iowa City, networking, where we're trying to connect resources and needs in our community and beyond, and then programming, which is kind of the most visible part of what we do. Our two next major programs that we'll do are our Music IC Festival, which is going to be in late June, and that celebrates the intersections between literature and classical music. There's a lot of literature that's inspired by classical music, and the reverse is true as well. And so we celebrate that. We have a house string quartet that comes in and performs music, and we often collaborate with writers in our community to create new work around those things. And then the Iowa City Book Festival is our big event of the year. That will be the first week of October this year, the 1st through the 6th. And with that, we bring 35 to 40 writers from around the country, and they join a number of writers and artists and other presenters from our community. We usually have about 100 people presenting throughout the course of that week in multiple venues around about 40 to 50 events throughout the course of the week. It's a great opportunity if perhaps somebody wanted to drive up from Paducah and be able to experience Iowa City. That's definitely kind of one of the big hubs for literary activity on our schedule.
And you did drive to Paducah.
I did.
It's an easy drive.
It's very drivable,
Some fun road trip stops along the way, but definitely worth considering making the trip.
Yeah, yeah.
Experiencing another creative city.
You can drive up along the Mississippi River and see all of the fall leaves. It's a great opportunity.
Absolutely. Well, I guess as we wrap up today, this Tourism Talk Show really reaches our local community, and I'd love for you to leave them with a thought about Paducah's role in this network and how we can really continue to find our place in this global network and represent American culture along with Iowa City and our fellow U.S. creative cities, but really find our place on the global stage. What would you say to the community?
Sure. Well, you know, you hinted at it earlier when we were talking about some of the larger cities, and we are among the smaller cities in the network. And despite our size, we have such rich and vibrant arts and culture. And so for a city like Paducah, you know, I often say that Iowa City didn't need to be told by UNESCO that we were a city of literature. We already knew. But what that designation allowed us to do was to tell our story internationally and to tell it to people who maybe aren't in that literary world. And I would say the same thing to Paducah, that designation is a very important and valuable tool that you can use to tell your story, that anybody in the quilting world knows about Paducah, and they have probably come to Paducah, but there are many, many people who don't know Paducah. They don't know Iowa City. And this designation, these designations that we have, membership in this network, really allows us to tell the rest of the world this is a place worth paying attention to, because there are amazing and creative things going on here. And using that as a tool to help spread that story is important for all of us to do.
Yes, and draw more people in to experience that firsthand.
Definitely.
I think that helps us to preserve and further our culture.
Exactly.
Yes, well, you always have great words, of course you do, being from a city of literature. Remind our viewers one last time where to find more information about Iowa City and your program.
So our website is iowacityoftliterature.org. If they wanted to learn about the book festival, we have a separate website. It's just iowacitybbookfestival.org. And all of our social media is linked off of both of those sites. And you can find us on Facebook and Twitter and Instagram and learn all about Iowa City.
Wonderful. Well, thank you for joining us today, John.
Yeah, thanks for the opportunity.
We appreciate you being here. And thank you for joining us on this episode of Tourism Talk. Visit paducah.travel/creative city to learn more about Paducah's role in the Creative Cities Network and the good company we keep here in the United States and within that 180 city network worldwide. We look forward to seeing you next time. Thank you.
1, 2, 1, 2, go. Hello, ba-ba-da-ba-ba. Ba-ba-da-ba-da-ba-da-ba-da-ba-da. Hello, ba-ba-da-ba-ba. Ba-ba-da-ba-da-ba-da-ba-da-ba-da. Ba-da-ba-da-ba-ba. Ba-ba-da-ba-ba. Ba-ba-da-ba-da-ba-da-ba-da-ba-da. Ba-da-ba-da-ba-ba. Ba-ba-da-ba-ba. Ba-da-ba-da-ba-ba. Ba-ba-da-ba. Ba-da-ba-da-ba-ba. Ba-ba-da-ba-ba. Ba-da-ba-da-ba-da-ba-da-ba-da.